Yep, that's me. You might be wondering how I got into this situation, but maybe we should just go back to the beginning. Pilgrim, naturally. I am here to speak to you today about my life on a bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Found myself on this bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I'm kind of close to land. I might try to scooch over there a little while later, but thought we'd give a little talk on how my life has gone, my bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Well, first of all, I made a big mistake by allowing people to exchange points on Twitch for a video subject, which naturally one would have assumed might have something to do with World of Tanks or some kind of gaming, but not my friend Pilgrim. My friend Pilgrim has me talking about my life on a bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's not a bad life. You may wonder where I go when I'm done streaming, what I do. Kind of like when you see your teacher when you're a kid, out and about, outside of the classroom, and you can't believe it. A little bit of the opposite of that, I suppose. What does Guido do? Well, I retired to my bowler hat, obviously, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and contemplate my life. So there's some things you need to know about living on a bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's kind of the three basic survival things, right? You're going to need some kind of cover, some kind of shelter, food, and water. Really are the basics there. So let's talk about my shelter, because as you can see, I've got quite a nice bowler hat. It's got a silver hat band on it, nice black felt bowler hat. This is, from my understanding, the basic bowler hat that is issued at birth to every British male citizen, and whichever female citizens would like to identify as such, so that as they stride about the empire on which the sun never sets, they have a proper chapeau, a proper hat to wear, and this is a one each issued British bowler hat. I stole it, of course, mostly for its flotation characteristics. Mostly for, you can see, as I'm here in the sea, the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, that it is riding quite nicely on the waves. Not a lot of rocking back and forth. No big issues with seasickness, unless we get some heavy seas or something like that. That can become a problem, at which point you just have to brace yourself on the inside of the bowler hat, and it's nice and felt. It's not too, there's no sharp edges in here. Now it's important, so if a wave is going to tumble you, you don't want any sharp edges. I mean, say you had an oven in here or a stove or something that had some sharp edges on it, and the hat started to tumble. I mean, you could be knocked out pretty quickly, but as it is, I just sort of bounce off the felt, and really doesn't matter which way the bowler hat lands. I'm pretty much okay. The other beauty about the bowler hat, in terms of shelter, is easy access to the water. There is no bottom to it, right? Because it has to go on your head, which means that you can immediately dive into the water from your shelter. Things like if you need to bathe, or perhaps there's some food down there you need to capture, you want to wrestle a shark or something of that nature like that. So in terms of shelter, when I'm done streaming and I go back to my bowler hat, I'm in pretty good shape. Pretty good shape as far as shelter goes. Not bad. Now let's talk a little bit about food. First of all, water. Water is not the easiest thing to get in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now, you're surrounded by it, aren't you? You are surrounded by it. I don't recommend drinking the salt water. That's a pretty quick trip to the other side, if you know what I'm saying. So either you're going to need one of those, osmosis machines or whatever those are called, which I don't have. I more or less just rely on the rains. We bless the rains down in Africa, and also the ones that drop on you in the Pacific. So cup your hands or something, perhaps take off your other hat. You could, on occasion, I'll roll the bowler hat over so that the opening is up, and that will capture a bunch of fresh water, at which point I can swim around and take a freshwater bath. It gets a little gnarly if you have to drink that. We'll just leave the details of that up to your own imagination, if you know what I mean, because we're getting kind of personal now with the whole cleanliness thing. You do want to keep yourself clean. You don't want to be all covered in salt blisters and such. The felt is problematic in terms of that. If it's wet, you can get a lot of sores on the old body. So you want to stay as dry as possible. But for the occasional bath, roll the bowler hat over, let the rain fill up the bowler hat, swim about a little bit. Maybe get your drink in, maybe take some drinks before the water gets kind of gnarly, if you know what I mean. That's probably the best bet right there. And then when you're done with all that, you can plop it over. Now, if you have some plastic, perhaps you've found a plastic bottle. Now, there's a lot of garbage floating around out in the Pacific, so kind of pay attention. If a bottle comes floating by, just grab that thing up, and then you can store some of your fresh water from the rain in the bottles. The problem is, in the bowler hat, there's not a lot of room, so you're not going to have a whole bunch of storage for bottles of water. Which brings us to the next thing: shelter, water, and then of course food. Now food's tricky. You're going to have to work for that. Once I get done streaming and I retire to my bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I do get a little bit peckish, if you know what I mean. But the Pacific is a bountiful place. You might think of it as a desert, but it isn't. There's all kinds of food out there. Obviously, the first one to start talking about is fish. I don't recommend the jelly-looking ones, the squishy things. Try to stay away from those. They don't taste good, and sometimes they hurt. So they're easy to catch. That's the thing about the jellyfish that they're tricking you with, is they're just going to float by. They don't even care. They don't try to get away. They're not very smart. Not the brightest thing out there. And you can just scoop those things up and take a bite, but no, sir, that is not good. First of all, it's not good because it doesn't taste good. So I do not recommend the jellyfish. Leave those alone. To some extent, those can be bait. It kind of depends on what eats them, but generally stuff that eat jellyfish, you probably don't want to eat either. I'd stay away from those as well. So really, what you want to do is get the little fish. And in general, when you're talking about survival situations in seas or oceans or waters that you don't know much about, there's a couple things you want to think about in terms of the type of fish you would want to eat. And there's some generalities, and some of them are, if they look weird, don't eat them. Like a lot of the weirder ones with the little tiny mouths and stuff, the things that eat the poisonous corals and things, you want to stay away from the weird ones. To a large extent, really bright ones, also not good. But if you can just find some little bait fish rolling around next to you, you can try to grab them with your hand. That's one thing. You just grab those guys. Remember, the bowler hat's open in the bottom, so that will attract fish. That's a nice thing. One nice thing is there's a little bit of shade from the bowler hat. That will attract some fish, good and bad, because it will also attract the bigger fish that are trying to eat the little fish. And eventually you're a little fish too, which we'll get to that in just a minute, because there are some dangers that you're going to want to keep in your mind while you're living on a bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But let's get back to just getting a little snack. You've just finished streaming. You've gone back to your bowler hat and retired for the day, and now you're hungry. So you're looking for some small fish, right? Well, there's a couple ways to do it. You can try to scoop it, and that's using a lot of energy. And one thing you want to try to do is you want to use as little energy as you can to get the sustenance that you need. So if you're using more energy getting your food than the food is providing, you're in a negative feedback loop, and eventually you're going to be the food. Right? You'll just fall out of the bottom of the bowler hat because you can no longer hold on anymore, and you'll just slip under the seas and float down to the bottom and be eaten by something. Something's going to get you on the way down, more than likely. If it doesn't, eventually you'll kind of lay on the bottom in the mud, and the little creatures will come out, and you'll be on your way to the next life. So you're going to want to try to grab the little fish. Now, what I've done is, the other thing you've got to think about is you got to use the resources that you had. So I've talked about the plastic. Maybe some other plastic comes by that's thicker. You could fashion that into a hook, but you're going to want some line. If some fabric or something, say like a burlap bag comes flying by or something, you could grab that. That'd be good. And here's what I did. You have to be careful because you're kind of deconstructing your shelter a little bit. But the felt bowler hat, has the little felt stuff on it. if you very carefully in places on the felt bowler hat kind of pull some of the felt off, you can then start to twist that into line. And the first line I made was about, I don't know, 3 feet, 4 feet long felt line, and it took me probably 17 weeks to build. I was kind of hungry at the end of that. That's the whole, do you have enough time before you run out of energy? 17 weeks was pretty good. The thing is, I have to admit, I had a bag of Cheetos that had kind of flown by, and so those kind of kept me alive for 17 weeks. So 3-foot felt fishing line, and then I cut out of a piece of plastic that I had a small hook, and then I put a Cheeto on the end of it because fish love Cheetos. It looks kind of like a salmon egg, but it's a Cheeto. It's not a salmon egg, it's a Cheeto. So that's what happened. You get the little bait fish, you kind of put the Cheeto down there, and you snag that guy. And that was the first fish that I got. So I immediately ate that thing, and that was a mistake because holy cow, it was gross. And don't eat the whole fish, really. I mean, I was hungry. I was kind of tired of Cheetos. But that's not recommended. Just use the smaller fish as a bait fish and continue to move on from there. Now, really, I did talk a little bit about the dangers then. So while fishing, you do have to be careful because there's sharks in the Pacific Ocean. As we all know, sharks ate whole shiploads of people in World War II. So that you're in a bowler hat, friends. I mean, a shark can just come up through the middle of the bowler hat and eat your legs, and then you have no legs, which is kind of hard. On the Pacific Ocean, it doesn't really work very well. So I recommend against sharks eating any part of you, really, but legs especially is probably not good. So you got to watch the sharks. Now, I will say this about sharks, and I think we all learned this on Finding Nemo, that the best plan with the sharks, especially Pacific, and maybe you're getting close to Australia, is you want to make friends with the sharks. And if they're Australian sharks, those are the funniest kind of sharks, and they're also the best friends. So you want to make friends with the sharks, and then, I mean, you're really golden, because once that happened, once we made friends with the sharks, and they realized, I'm an American, not English. I think if you're English, that might be a little tougher. The Australians are not as friendly, I think, with the rest of the empire as they are with the former colonials in America. That's the sense I get. But once I made friends with them, then they brought me all kinds of food and stuff. Now, sometimes it's a little chewed up or maybe questionable on where it came from. It's a shark. They just really eat anything. Although, to be honest, I have garnered a few useful items from things they ate or pieces of it that they brought back, and I'm like, Carl, this is not this is not food. Where'd you get this? And he's like, no, I just bit that off the back of a boat. I'm like, it's a whole engine, man. He's like, yeah, I thought you could use that to move around on your bowler hat. And I'm like, holy cow, are you kidding me? You're right. So a little 15 horsepower Evinrude that he just bit off the back of a boat. You can't see it. It's back there. But man, now I can just zing around on the Pacific Ocean. 15 horsepower is more than enough for a bowler hat. I mean, it's probably overpowered, if I'm honest. It will get up on plane, and now you're moving out. You know what I'm saying? So I can move my bowler hat. That's nice for storms because you want to kind of swing into the wind and go straight into the waves. In the past, as I said earlier, on a storm, the waves would just tumble me and I'd be just flying around. But now with my 15 horsepower Evinrude, I can go right to it. The only issue I have is gas. Obviously, every once in a while, I have to ask the sharks if they can go, swipe a gas tank off the back of a boat and bring me some more gas. But for the most part, a 15 horsepower doesn't really use much gas, so it's been pretty good. So there you go. I mean, really, at the end of the day, my life on a bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean has been pretty fantastic. I've got my shelter, the bowler hat itself, water, not a problem. And I'm able to eat, and I've made a few shark friends from Australia, which has made things really easily. So that's what I do, my friends, at the end of the day when I'm done streaming. I just retire to my bowler hat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I float around and wait for the next day I see you on stream. All right, see ya.